In the valley of Hinnom, they built sacrificial sites for Baal, and burned their children as sacrifices to the god Moloch. Their own sons and daughters they sacrificed to demons. Never have I commanded them so abominable a thing. With no thought ever thought that they should involve themselves in such great guilt. For these nations have done what the Lord detests. Even their children they have burned for their gods.
The centuries-old practice of child sacrifice to Baal, Moloch, and the Luciferian gods, condemned in the Bible, is still practiced to this very day. Around the world, many victims and witnesses are breaking the silence about this dark secret that has clung to our earth like cancer for millennia. The following voices reveal a Luciferian blood cult that practices child sacrifice and other cruelties. If we do not listen to them, and it's too difficult for us to even listen to what others have had to experience, if we do not spread these cries for help, the innocent blood of defenseless children will continue to flow and flow. You have a responsibility. Yes, you who are watching this film right now.
And I would say the other worst thing for me was watching children be sacrificed in the Vatican, watching them be brought in and watching them be cut open, and watching all the VIP people in the room they do these sacrifices to invite demonic entities to inhabit them. And I was able to feel and see these entities also. And that was, for me, to see evil itself was something that also still haunts me to this day.
As this little boy was being cut open alive, the man doing this was also bending over him and appeared to be eating the boy's entrails and blood. When the boy died and his screams stopped, a black mist appeared in the center of the room, at the same distance that this little boy's body was from me. And I'm still at the head of the table on the altar. The men were chanting, and I remember them saying, Lucifer. The black mist in the center of the room grew larger, and this demon was summoned. I saw its red eyes, and it was speaking in another language. Its voice sounded like thunder.
But then they were still sawed up and were screaming. They told us it was the devil who was rising while they were screaming. That's when they were still alive. What did they do with the bodies? Partially eaten.
Many survivors tell exactly the same story. Also, Astrid Dauster writes in her book, Opferkind, Victim Child, how her father, as a practicing Satanist, communicated directly with Lucifer. She was even there herself. Astrid's father inflicted indescribably cruel tortures on her throughout her childhood. He also took her to black masses, where babies were sacrificed, where she was tortured so extremely that she was very often in the near-death realm, where she had repeatedly encountered God who gave her strength. The Satanic Community Brotherhood of S.R.A. massively attacked her story of suffering on Facebook, and so the video was deleted, after which the Satanists expressed their great joy about this. S.R.A., by the way, is another name for the fallen angel Lucifer, who is also called the devil.
These folks are dyed-to-the-wool Luciferian Satanists. They have completely given themselves to this cult. Luciferians communicate directly with Lucifer through the ritual practice of child sacrifice. This practice originated in the cult of Baal. Baal is just a name for Leviathan or Lucifer or Moloch. These are all referencing the same energy. The cult of Baal, which is the oldest cult ever established on this planet, is the ancient precursor to Luciferianism. Luciferianism, I personally consider, simply a formalized and highly organized cult of Baal. They are pure darkness, and this emptiness, lack, drives their craving for our life energy.
John Todd is also a whistleblower of the Lucifer sect. He testified to countless human sacrifices by Satanists. Thousands are being sacrificed on Halloween alone. He told about the Rothschilds leading the sect. They were the mouthpiece of Lucifer. There were 13 chairs at their table, whereby the 13th was for Lucifer, because he would sit there himself. He had seen all of this with his own eyes. John Todd tells of being on the Supreme Council of 13 and passing on direct political orders from the Rothschilds to politically influential people, such as governors or senators who happened to be in his area. He said that since Woodrow Wilson, and including him, there has never been a U.S. president who did not belong to this Satan's cult. We would elect the presidents they put up for us. For example, he also said that the Council on Foreign Relations is a section of this cult. He says that this cult has nothing to do with Jewish matters. It is 100% Druidic occult.
But we were attending rituals also, rituals where they did murder children and animals. Animals is what they did like on your average holiday. But on the big ones, which they call black masses, it's where basically, and this is mostly satanic people, these covens of like 13 usually, because it's usually 13 members of a satanic coven, they'll get together with other covens in the area for these big black masses, they call them. And those are on specific days throughout the year. So on a few of those, I watched them actually kill children.
For example, she tells about a ritual where a very small girl was tied to a large pole, lifted over a huge fire, and died instantly. The hair instantly dissolved, the skin fell off the body in layers. It was the cruelest event a person could ever witness.
Can you also remember rituals performed on certain holidays? Yes, many times in the fall, Halloween, these rituals where I just realize these are not just rituals in everyday life, but really certain holidays where you really celebrated it and very, very, very many children were sacrificed.
Alex Jones succeeded in filming such a ritual in front of a huge Moloch statue with a hidden camera as a witness in the strictly sealed Bohemian Grove. High officials from politics, business, and the media take part in these rituals. The participation of the following persons is documented: U.S. Presidents Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, George Bush Sr. and Jr., Bill Clinton. German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt was also present. In addition, Henry Kissinger, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the heads of Standard Oil and General Electric attended these meetings. Eyewitnesses such as Kathy O'Brien and Kathy Collins recounted the events at Bohemian Grove.
And a lot of my experiences were in Presidio and Bohemian Grove. I was used from a very young age, and I remember going through an initiation ritual at the age of 3. Someone was forcing me to drink blood. And then a case in Bohemian Grove where I was forced to watch a child sacrifice.
Survivor Kathy O'Brien also testifies to human sacrifice at the Bohemian Grove site.
It was this glorification of the whole act. You saw these people there in their red robes, practicing this religiously for the glory of their savior Satan. The things that were added to it, killing and cannibalism. There were children being killed, and the tone was, if you don't do it, you're screwed. This being then had access to me, and I had to kill the little girl.
Ein Kind umgebracht.
Was? Schick's auf Distanz. Schick's jetzt.
Aber ein lebendes.
Schick es auf Distanz.
Und die haben das dann aufgegessen. Und es waren dann nur noch Haare und alle anderen Knochenteile übrig. Und Augen auch und Zähne.
At the meetings, well, Satan was worshipped and they just celebrated masses. The atmosphere there is just as if the devil is really in the room. And they stand in a circle and the faces were covered. They have such black capes and the hoods. And the murmuring is just very like a sing-song. And you were all worshipping the devil inside your home. Right. Rituals in which babies were sacrificed, and you'd have to, babies. So you witnessed the sacrifice. Right. When I was very young, I was forced to participate in that, in which I had to sacrifice an infant. And the purpose of the sacrifice is to bring you what? What are you sacrificing for? For power. Power.
Well, see, first of all, it's normal when you go to the Old Testament, Moloch and the Baals, they wanted the baby, the children. Explained to me by Satanists because it's a higher level of blasphemy to God, against God. It's and for some reason the demons love bringing that kind of harm. We look at a child and automatically we're going to protect them, save them, guard them, whatever it takes. They look at a child, they'd eat it alive, they destroy it, they'd torture it. That's why some rituals are called demon revels or satanic revels. The younger the child, here's exactly what dark undergrounders have said to me: the younger, the better. And we never kill them right away. We prolong the torture. Why? Because we have to raise the energies, the terror, the fear, and then little by little letting some blood out.
She tells about a black mass where everyone began to sing and then slaughtered and disemboweled a newborn baby. Meanwhile, the grandfather of the victim said a prayer for Satan. And this victim here tells of how the Satanists reenacted the crucifixion of Jesus by hanging a man on the cross who was trying to save her and her sister. They threw a bunch of bloody parts of killed babies at him and also at the two victims, as she shared. A great many victims testify that Satanists pervert Christian customs and holidays in order to blaspheme God.
There are satanic groups that force mothers to sacrifice their own child to Satan. It may happen that they are ritually impregnated only for this purpose.
Also, Detective Kurt Jackson of the Beaumont Police Department confirms these child sacrifices and child slaughters. Some of them are shot, stabbed, or poisoned. Attorney Karin Knappen raises awareness about the satanic elite and the enslavement, rape, torture, and murder of children and newborns. She raises awareness about an important research on satanic rituals in which children are murdered and then have their organs removed to be sold. It is a covered-up and protected billion-dollar business, Knappen said. A women's counseling center in Germany cites Satanism as the main background of ritual abuse. Asked if children are still ritually abused in her town today, she replies,
I don't suspect it, I know it.
Ray Wire is a British criminologist and an absolute expert on satanic cults. He investigated many cases of satanic ritual violence and also checked the statements of Teresa, a survivor, for their authenticity. He had no doubt whatsoever that she was telling the truth. Among other things, she reported that she was forcibly impregnated several times at a young age and that her babies were wrested from her and ritually sacrificed. See my first film on the blood cult. Paul Bonacci also had his say in my last film. He describes the most horrific experiences of ritual abuse he had with satanic cults in Nebraska. The lawyer, Juliana Denson-Gerber, says that Paul Bonacci couldn't possibly be lying. His statements coincide with statements from very many other victims who have spoken of the same abuse. And she is an abuse expert. She says he described satanic rituals in great detail that he couldn't possibly have known about if he hadn't participated in them. Survivor Loretta Smith also testified independently of Paul Bonacci and without knowing him about the same horrific ritual abuse she had experienced at the hands of satanic cults in Nebraska. Yes, even to the point of satanic ritual sacrifice and cannibalism she herself was forced to participate in. Neil Brick is a survivor of ritual abuse by Freemasons. Brick is now educating the public about ritual abuse crimes, as explained in the KLA TV documentary World Danger, Highest Degree Freemasonry. The top of this organization is highly satanic.
My father is a Freemason Satanist Rosicrucian, and he was also an ASIO operative. So ASIO in my country of Australia is the equivalent of the MI6 or CIA. So they're intelligence operatives. So some of the ritual abuse, the sacrificial children were actually eaten, which is just horrific and very difficult for a lot of people to understand, but this is actually quite common. And one particular ritual, a baby was murdered and then eaten, and there were probably about 50 adults there. So you know, we're talking many different kinds of child sacrifice, rapes, dismemberment of children afterwards, and cannibalism.
Asia Rain was born into a family that actively practiced satanic ritual abuse. She was tortured and raped and had to participate in ritual sacrifice ceremonies. She was told that God was the one hurting her. Often a perpetrator would pretend to be Jesus, and after extremely brutal injury, the victim was then, quote-unquote, saved by someone to whom the victim was supposed to bond with, a so-called perpetrator bond, as many survivors call this. And this was then, for example, the respective counselor or directly Lucifer. Jamal Bari was sold to a Luciferian. He was tortured and violated to the utmost. He speaks of a girl who memorized many verses from the Bible. She was abused and raped, he says, and then whispered in her ear, "I am your Lord Jesus."
First, you have to understand that there are different groups. There are also atheists on the one side, but highly regarded are the people who are believers, who believe in Lucifer, Satan. They know that God exists, otherwise you can't even focus that negative energy. That is, you know he exists, you turn your back on him. And I will never forget that day in my whole life. They tied a young girl to the table. I can't tell you how old she was, but she didn't reach her 13th year. She was still young, and she was... I'm not going to lie to you now, but countless men raped her until she died. That's also ritual. That's a ritual. And I'll say it again. Evil is real. Evil exists.
Roger Monod was recruited by Satan worshippers and gained insight into the structure of the sect, from which he later escaped under fierce attacks, persecution, and death threats by converting to Jesus Christ. He also witnessed satanic sacrifices on Halloween, October 31st, amongst other dates.
Well, it was a big surprise for me, as I'd kind of made up my mind that they would be looking for rough-looking characters, but as we entered the place, I was amazed to see that they were all very well dressed, well-mannered, and that a lot of the people, as were being introduced, were professionals, doctors, attorneys, lots of business people. They had three major policies that were going to be followed. First, they were to see to it that humans would be made to believe that Satan and his angels do not really exist. Lucifer says we have to make sure that people get to believe that Satan and his angels do not really exist.
Another strategy of the sect has been to destroy the Bible without burning it. Thus, it was decided that Charles Darwin, who was a high-level member of the satanic cult, would come up with the theory of evolution so that belief in the Bible would dissolve by itself. Darwin enjoyed the highest honor in the cult of Lucifer, according to Roger Monod. But it's the Bible itself, which has been authenticated multiple times as a historical chronicle that presents evidence for these Moloch and Baal sacrifices already taking place thousands of years ago. My father, Ivo Sazik, proves in the brochure Yahweh, Creator or Devil, through the whole Bible how the satanic cult of sacrifice has always taken place, and that this has always been the greatest abomination to Creator God. In her publications, Cult Survivor Svali shares precious information from inside the cult in which the idolatrous cults described in the Bible are confirmed one-to-one. For example, she describes the Babylonian program. It involves learning to make cruel offerings and rituals to the deities Molech, Astaroth, Bel, and Ashtaroth. The Egyptian program teaches offerings to the deities Ra, Horus, Set, etc. She also testifies to Druid or Kabbalah programming, etc. What runs through all of these programs is the excessive cruelty of torture and murder. No matter what their ideological background is, some survivors also testify to the same horrific practices without any ideological background apparent to them. And now the question of all questions arises. Can one believe such statements at all? That sounds completely inconceivable. The crazy thing is that the perpetrator circles know exactly that nobody can believe this because it is unbelievable. S.R.A. Douster's father, the Satanist who tortured her so abhorrently, said to her, and I quote, "You can try to get help, but believe me, the one who will believe you has yet to be born." The same is testified to by Herbert Steiner, called Herbie, who survived the cruelest ritual tortures and rapes.
As a victim of ritual violence, I was involved in sacrifices of animals and humans. I was told over and over again, never talk about it because no one will believe you.
Thus, these victims who have been violated to the extreme and who have only barely survived are even ridiculed, disrespected, and excluded from our society when they speak about these terrible things. Survivor Mary Knight, for example, recounts how she was placed in a coffin with the body of her beloved sister and then had to watch her sister's body being mutilated before her very eyes. She even had to participate in this herself. Such rituals are now witnessed by hundreds of victims. But Mary says that most survivors do not speak about this cruel satanic ritual abuse because no one believes them. So they only speak about some small part, like abuse or incest.
The ritualistic abuse, the satanic ritual abuse, is the last thing people will talk about. They just say we're crazy. They just say we as survivors are crazy.
There is nothing worse than when you know that something like this has happened to you and the majority simply can't believe it, and you are seen in public, especially by the public media, as a crank, as a liar, as someone like that.
This is also the worst thing for Natalie, who remembers satanic rituals in hunting lodges and manhunts, among other things. You feel completely left alone because as a victim, you are then made out to be imagining all this and crazy.
Satanism exists in this country as it exists elsewhere. It is appallingly evil, it is about murder, it's about child abuse, it's about sexual abuse. It is no joke and it must be taken seriously and it must be dealt with. One of the most tragic stories that I've ever heard is where a child has told people what's been happening and the adults have said, "Don't be stupid, that doesn't happen in this country."
Human rights activist Gabi Wendland comments, "At first it sounds inconceivable, unthinkable, and simply not possible. But these victims live among us. There might be hundreds of thousands of them." Christoph Cassetti, former canon of the Diocese Münster, summed it up this way, I quote, "What happens in these secret circles goes beyond our human imagination of evil. Accordingly, one classifies it as impossible." So these victims are not believed because it is beyond our imagination. But until a victim ever talks about any of this, he has risked his neck because secrecy is the highest commandment in this sect. This is enforced with the worst death threats.
Arcanum Latin, the secret, the Disciplina Arcanae. The Disciplina Arcanae dictates that I really should not tell anything about the group's infrastructure to an outsider, a non-initiated, and violating the Arcan discipline is subject to martial threats of punishment. Banally speaking, they say, if you out us, in whatever way, you're going to have your head taken off.
The kids are told that if you tell your parents, we're going to kill your parents. For me, for example, they did that by showing me someone who had their throat slit. And then when you see that and you see who all is involved, you just get terrified.
Survivor Teal Swan, for example, was intimidated as a little girl, thinking that her mother would be skinned if she said anything, and her father would be beheaded, and her brother eaten and disemboweled.
And when you're little, like, we got to understand this. When you're little, you have no reason to disbelieve an adult. None. So if a guy says he's going to kill your family, he's going to kill your family.
These people, these psychopathic, pedophile, Satanist elites, they have succeeded with secrecy and deception.
According to psychiatrist Dr. Werner Chan, silence is the perpetrator's strongest weapon.
If you're a child like me at 5 or 6 years old and you're at a ritual and you're watching another child the same age refuse to be, please don't do that, and fighting against whatever they want to do, and then that child is killed in front of you, what are you going to do? That's a type of brainwashing, right? Survival at all costs. So of course you're going to comply.
So for most of these victims, it is not even possible to come clean because they are threatened in such a way. In most cases, the threats are put into practice if the victim could not create enough publicity with his statements. This was the case with William Combs, for example. He was one of the main witnesses to a mass murder of Indigenous children. There was also a testimony of abuse and ritual sacrifice. He died from a lethal injection in a hospital, although he had only undergone a routine, harmless procedure. Coombs died because he made a statement in 1964 that 10 children were abducted from a Canadian school by Queen Elizabeth. In addition to William Coombs, the names of the following dead children and eyewitnesses were documented, mostly gruesome death stories that I will not tell for the sake of time here. Vicky Stewart, Margaret Sepes, Albert Gray, Maisie Shaw, Richard Thomas, Elaine Dick, Daniel Kangatok, David Sepas, Susan Ball, Pauline Frank, Albert Baptiste, Nancy Joe, Lorraine White, Johnny Bingo Dawson, Ricky, Lovely, Harriet Nahani, Nora Bernhardt. All of them can no longer tell their story. Kevin Annette uncovered all of this. Only Irene Favell and Rufus McNaughton survived. They witnessed a newborn baby being burned and 18 Mohawk children being shot to death, then dumped in a mass grave. In Canada alone, approximately 50,000 baby and child corpses were discovered in mass graves. In total, at least 34 mass graves of children were discovered in Canada, Ireland, and Spain, the excavation of which was refused by the respective governments of the English Crown and the Catholic Church. So the dead can no longer testify, but the survivors, who have received enough protection through the public, they testify that there is still one huge hurdle for the victims to tell their story. It is the fact that they were drawn into complicity as young children. So they are plagued by enormous feelings of guilt, and they must additionally fear being brought to justice themselves. This prevents them from speaking freely about the crimes.
Did you have to, or were you forced to, kill someone?
Yes. Yes, quite often. That even reinforces the silence. I felt just as similar to them. I thought I was just as bad as them, which now in retrospect sounds totally crazy. Yes. But I carried that guilt around with me for a very, very long time. For example, you have a knife in your hand for the first time yourself, you are guided by the perpetrator, and you have to kill the animals, and then later you just cut up babies and toddlers.
Annegret was also forced to kill. She describes her subsequent feelings of guilt and suicidal thoughts. She describes this as a vicious cycle of first being a victim and then a perpetrator. Filled with guilt, Katharina also told her counselor, "These hands killed." The counselor then escorted her to the police. Annette had filed a complaint with the police against her own parents and against herself because one had forced her to kill. She also witnessed the torture of her then 11-year-old brother, who lay in front of her as a soulless, screaming and jerking body then. This touched her very strongly. Her brother later shot himself. Consistently, the survivors report that the cult members force them in the following ways. First, if you don't do it, someone else will, so you can't save this child from death anyway. Secondly, if you do not do it, you will be killed yourself. Trauma specialist Roswitha Ewald knows such descriptions of ritual abuse from many of her patients. The religious scholar Adelheid Hermann Pfand warns that the truly threatening satanic cults operate in secret. Brigitte Hahn, a commissioner of the Counseling Center for Organized and Ritual Violence of the Münster Diocese, explains that anyone who wants to renounce the cult group is in mortal danger. For many years, she accompanied women who wanted to leave a satanic cult. This counseling center was closed because of the influence of the satanic community Brotherhood of Samael and a Spiegel media campaign by Christopher Pilz. More details can be found in these documentaries. To summarize, a big hurdle to testify about satanic ritual abuse is the enforced complicity and the fact that the victims are not believed, as it sounds too inconceivable. And thirdly, the victims and witnesses have had to face death threats. Despite of this, hundreds of victims and witnesses now talk and describe the same cruel rituals all over the world, uncoordinated and completely independently of each other. Countless victims report unanimously that they were transported to different places in the world where large satanic ceremonies had taken place. They report that many elite people were present at these large satanic meetings and ceremonies during which the children were victims of ritualistic mass rapes and cruel child sacrifices were performed in the name of Satan. It is imperative that these many consistent witnesses be investigated by independent bodies, since it is clear from the testimonies that the judicial system worldwide is involved in these crimes. I will briefly summarize several statements of survivors now. Please stay with me. Jeanette Archer was born into a family in London that belonged to a satanic cult for many generations. She was ritually abused for many years and attended child sacrifices. She was also chased with other children through dark woods in so-called hunting games of the upper class with dogs. In the process, again and again, many children were killed in a cruel way. She was tortured extremely, for example, with electric shocks and with waterboarding. She says that her supervisor at the Tavistock Institute was Klaus Schwab, the director of the World Economic Forum. Jeanette also reported that she attended satanic rituals at the estates of the British royal family and that David Rockefeller was a participant in these rituals. He reportedly wanted to take her with to the USA and make her a star there. Jeanette Archer also explains the importance of Halloween in the satanic cult. Halloween is celebrated with mass sacrifices of babies and children. Nessia also talks about all these cruelties involving child sacrifices and cannibalism, exactly the same descriptions that Elka gave. She describes that money, violence, and greed are the greatest joy for these heartless creatures. She also reports that when women turn to the dark side, they are much, much worse than men. Women are more deceitful, tougher, and more brutal. Alicia, as well, gives account of ritual abuse, rape, and sodomy. She was tortured with electric shocks, nearly drowned several times, and was drugged and hypnotized. She now informs on how the Luciferian Satan worshippers practice these cruelties for thousands of years. Elena also tells of the same cruel things, and how she was locked into dark rooms for days without food, drink, or clothing. Lily was forced to kill babies and eat human flesh in rituals. She was forced to watch as pregnant women were cut open, alive, and disemboweled. Vincent, a French boy, was raped repeatedly by his own father from the age of 5. He reported that his father had a video collection of gang rapes, tortures, and murders on camera known as snuff videos. Many witnesses and victims report the same thing. Vincent had been forced by his father to watch one such snuff video in which a girl was shot by his father's friend. His father threatened the same would happen to him if he told anyone about it. In their book, Green Stuff, the Child Sex Mafia in Germany, Chief Detective Manfred Paulus and police psychologist Adolf Gawitz describe the existence of snuff videos, and they also report extremely brutal child sex scenes, including the rape of babies, as well as sex with disabled or dead children. Abuse victim Karin recognized the Webelsburg as crime scene. She reports of an altar on which her child, with whom she was 6 months pregnant, was aborted and subsequently sacrificed. Maike and Leah were also able to identify the Webelsburg as the scene of their horrific experience of ritual violence, including manhunts. Maike had been systematically sexually abused and passed around from an early age. There was not a single perpetrator, but many hundreds of perpetrators. She also describes a cage in which children were held captive. Julia also tells about this in her interview about ritual violence. Rika also reports of ritual abuse at the Webelsburg, amongst others, but also in many other countries. Rika's family worshipped the devil. She was present at rituals where occult beings were invoked. This is what she says the worst experience for her was. Human sacrifice where mutilation and desecration were also performed. Michelle Smith was 5 years old when her mother surrendered her to a cult of devil worshippers. She had horrific experiences with satanic witches who sacrificed humans and animals. She experienced abuse and torture. She was buried alive and then again and again taken out. Michelle disclosed her horrifying experiences in her book entitled Michelle Remembers. When her book was published, a flood of other victims got in touch with her. Frances Toews survived satanic ritual abuse and extreme torture. Her parents were part of a satanic cult in Toronto and sold her for $600,000 when she was 3 years old. She says that, among other things, she was then used for secret military projects. She speaks of the challenging journey of healing, which was only possible through her turning to God. Carol Rutz says that she was sold at the age of 4 by her father to the U.S. government for secret experiments. For the next 12 years, she underwent training in which thousands of American children endured unimaginable psychological and physical pain. The goal of this brainwashing was absolute mind control over these children to turn them into compliant slaves who could be used for numerous purposes, from sexual seduction of high-ranking individuals up to assassinations. Laura tells she was so unbelievably and abysmally viciously abused in a way that no one could even imagine. Personality parts then split off and you no longer have access to yourself. This is called multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder. The media say that therapists invent these things and talk the patients into them. But as early as 1900, the missionary Amy Carmichael saved temple children in India who were so satanically tortured that new, quote, inner persons separated. She was a witness from a time when there were no therapists. Karen is convinced that many people in clinics who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia or borderline syndrome are in fact victims of ritual violence. In this context, it is remarkable that Gabriele Hager, who is accused by her daughter of being a perpetrator of satanic ritual cruelty, describes her as schizophrenic. Gabriele Hager can now be fairly certain that no one will investigate whether she is truly committing satanic crimes, since her daughter is now considered to be unsound. In a ZDF program, Marie testifies about satanic monstrosities, amongst other things, the limbs of small children and babies being chopped off. Hundreds testify about such cruel things that can't even be named, and it doesn't seem rehearsed at all, or as if someone had talked them into it. Steve, for example, jabs himself in the leg with a needle during his entire testimony to physically block the pain that lives in his memories.
A dagger and said finish him. I objected, and then I had a knife forced into my throat. And I know for a fact that if I hadn't have done what they said, then I'd have been swapping place with him. So I stabbed him in the throat. They weren't happy with that. I had to continue doing it and doing it and doing it. After that was done, they forced me to actually...
Kaya was subjected to satanic ritual abuse from the early age of 4. She reports of churches and castles, of altars in dark rooms, of people in dark robes. She had been impregnated for the first time at the age of 11, but the birth had been induced long before the normal duration of pregnancy. And then she was forced to take the life of her own child, after which a cannibalistic ritual took place. The lawyer Heidi Zarman herself had contact with many victims all over Germany, independently of each other. They all described very similar patterns of their ritual abuse, so she classified the reports as true. ZDF reporter Rainer Fromm researched 20 cases for a documentary, ranging from the most brutal ritual abuse to murder and cannibalism. Psychotherapist and trauma therapy expert Dagmar Eckers has children in her therapy who have witnessed horrific ritual acts. She has no doubt whatsoever about the statements of her patients. Kalin Georgescu, a former high-ranking UN official, also testified.
These oligarchs, all of them, are related with the system of the pedophilia one, because we know that there are more than 8 million children per year which they disappear. 8 million does mean the entire population of Austria. They disappear without any information, simply like that. This criminal act is have to be stopped.
And yet the official media still unanimously groan, there is no evidence of satanic ritual violence here. These are all just bogus memories implanted by therapists. As the latest episode of the German Y Collective with Manuel Möglich is also now proclaiming, all the violated victims and credible witnesses are no evidence for the media. The latest documentary by Jan Böhmermann of ZDF is a slap in the face for all those affected and the survivors. It's time for a brief story of satanic panic. But no evidence for a satanic network, so the whole thing is nothing more than a collective delusion. By the way, Jan Böhmermann earns more than the German Chancellor and the ZDF director together, according to top media lawyer Professor Rolf Höcker. So we will now face this issue thoroughly and question witnesses and survivors about it. Where is the evidence? Let's start with scars, brandings, and markings.
I was branded as a small child with a small star tattoo on my finger. It was done by the dealer's circle. This made clear which of these circles I belonged to. The teacher saw it, but never questioned what kind of tattoo a 12-year-old girl had there.
A little bit more about Coco Berthmann. She tells of her ritual abuse and torture. Her sister was killed while trying to escape, and she herself managed to escape at the age of 15. The abuse victim Lucy also has a lot of cut and burn scars. So does Isabel. She has more than 700 scars on her body and 15 clearly broken limbs. She had been hung upside down, raped, beaten, received knife wounds in her back, Her family was heavily involved in satanic ritual abuse, and she recounts horrific accounts of her ritual abuse, such as having her head crushed between blocks of wood. The survivor Lunis also has scars and marks on her body. But how do our opinion makers deal with such evidence? In a luxurious Hollywood movie, the victim is portrayed as only wanting to generate attention and self-inflicted this painful burn of the upside-down satanic cross. The victims are often marked with this symbol. The film is a true story in which a girl exposed a whole satanic circle around her family with exact descriptions of the rituals and ceremonies, as they are identically described by hundreds of witnesses and survivors worldwide. At the end of the Hollywood film, the investigator makes the crude argument that the girl made all of this up to get rid of her family, that the tortures, the photos, the sacrifices were all pure imagination, that the identical memories of the father, the brother, and the grandmother were imaginary concepts triggered by the girl and the investigator himself, who had believed her at first. I asked the survivor, Lunis, what do you say about you supposedly being talked into the ritual abuse, or of you making it up?
Let this be told you, I am not a therapist victim. I became a victim of massive sexual abuse and violence since my earliest childhood. Period. And this experience, these feelings, the internal, massive pressure, the symptoms, the intrusive thoughts, these are not things that a supposed conspiracy-believing therapist would have talked us into or could talk us into, because that takes massive methods that don't happen in therapy. If the doubters of this kind of violence would once again really listen to those affected, then they would, for example, notice how terribly damn difficult it is to get support at all with such issues, how difficult it is for therapists to get involved with victims like us. How many therapists who are then looking for therapists say, no, that's going too far for me, I can't take it.
I have another question for you. What do you say about there supposedly being no evidence of ritual violence?
I am the evidence for it. My memories, which no one talked me into, are proof of that. I am a living witness and victim of this violence, and I do not benefit at any level of my life from sharing that. The consequences of the violence are simply too severe for that. The struggle is far too great to get people deal with it, as we are doing here today, and the places for help where you can go are far too few, in order to be able to generate more attention with it.
Yeah. Now let's ask more survivors. Why is there apparently no evidence of the ritual abuse witnessed everywhere and all of the sacrifices?
There is a reason why the FBI does not investigate in these cases. There is a reason why there is no evidence, because there are people in high position in the CIA, the FBI, the police stations, and they have numerous ways to get rid of evidence and to enter the medical professional fields to dismiss any sort of evidence. The police, the FBI, the CIA, all the offices of the federal government, companies, lawyers, doctors, engineers, school teachers, babysitters, they are all in a big, disgusting secret society.
The vast majority of victims and witnesses tell us that this is exactly how it happens and that these people even blackmail each other. Anna-Marie van Blienburg, for example, a lawyer with many years of experience, tells of having been an eyewitness 3 times to ritual abuse and the murder of children by members of the Dutch royal family, top politicians, judicial officials, and other dignitaries.
The child was put on a table and were giving something to drink. And in that drink, with that drink, the child was drugged. At a certain moment, the child was tortured, raped, and brutally murdered before those people. The audience was around Johan Frieso, Prince Johan Frieso, the second son of Queen Beatrix. In order of Queen Beatrix, they have organized martel, torture, rape and killing of children in a public setting. The whole building was filled with very important people from the Netherlands, ministers, high-ranking officers, and all kinds of people that the criminals could put on photo, so they could blackmail those people and get criminal advantages from that.
Could you name some of the people who were present?
The people that I recognized there were, for instance, Prince Johan Frieso, his steady psychiatrist, Guus Parot-Dumont. I recognized Mabel Wisse-Smith. She was there with an old, steady man. I think it was George Soros. I recognized Donner, former Minister of the Law Department, at this moment Viceroy of the Netherlands. I recognized Ernst Hirsch-Ballin, a very important former Minister of Justice. I recognized A. van den Emster. He was for years the head of all judges in the Netherlands. I recognized Dick Berlijn, the former head of the military department in the Netherlands. I recognized a journalist, a very important journalist, Gerlof Leistra, of the journal The Elsevier. I recognized Carla Herades. At present, she is president of the court in Amsterdam, a judge. I recognized Mark Rutte. He is at this moment president of the Netherlands. I recognize Geert Wilders. He is at this moment the head of the political party PVV in the Dutch parliament. There were about 50 people every time I was taken there. I have been taken there 3 times. I have seen every time a child was killed.
Annemarie van Blienberg reveals that the children came from juvenile detention centers and were supposedly working at Queen Beatrix's court. A journalist from De Telegraaf spoke to all these institutions who confirmed this. The staff of these juvenile detention centers had become suspicious because they had never heard from these children again. Annemarie spoke to every police officer and judicial official she could find, including Interpol. She went to court to effect a conviction. But the court answered, this was not her problem, but a problem of society. And they refused to issue the prosecutor a mandate to investigate. Regina Louf is an important witness in the Dutroux case. She became pregnant several times since the age of 13 as a result of satanic ritual abuse and had to watch as her babies were ritually sacrificed. When an investigative judge testified on television in the Dutroux case, Regina Louf recognized him as one of the perpetrators of the murder of her baby. She also later recognized many perpetrators of the pedocriminal network in the newspaper photos and on television. According to her statements, the perverted, cruel perpetrators were all highly regarded, honorable members of society, including judges, politicians, lawyers, managers, industrialists, etc. The police investigated a connection with the satanic group Abrasax. 27 eyewitnesses lost their lives in the Dutroux case. The former head of the State Criminal Investigation Department, Uwe Kranz, testifies about child molester rings all the way to the highest circles. He states that with all these large cases which were investigated, for example with the Dutroux case, it was always downgraded to alleged single cases. In some cases, up to 1,400 other perpetrators were identified from the highest social classes, who all got away with this. Pediatrician Dr. Dorothy Toole testifies under oath about the worst, most perverse child abuse perpetrated by judges and prosecutors. The most frequent victims, she says, are toddlers and babies. The often testified to network of perpetrators up to the highest circles and courts would indeed be an explanation for the fact that there is so little officially approved and officially accessible evidence. Chuck Swindoll testifies that all circles now of power on earth are involved in Luciferian child sacrifices. This is also testified to unanimously by all victims, without them knowing each other. Karina, for example, tells that the perpetrators in her family were all high military and government officials, a whole line of ancestors that can be traced far back. She experienced the cruelest ceremonies and sacrificial rituals, which cannot be described here in detail.
They're people that are educated, they're judges, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're morticians, they're people who work in a hospital that can do all kinds of medical issues. So they had somebody to cover their back in every single way.
Let's look at some cases of what this looks like in practice. Anke Hill's 6-year-old son accused his father of having experienced satanic ritual abuse at the hands of him and other perpetrators. He was adjudged to the father, and the mother, Anke Hill, a German veterinarian, was charged with alleged child abduction and sent to prison along with 5 other accomplices. Anke Hill turned to lawyer Wilfried Wong for help at the time. However, former British lawyer Wilfried Wong failed to save Anke's son. He was sentenced to 19 years in prison for so-called conspiracy to kidnap a child. So the rescuer himself became a victim, as in countless other cases. But he is an expert in the field due to 27 years of experience with hundreds of victims of satanic ritual abuse. Wilfried Wong, literally. It is a big problem because the social services have become so corrupt that in many cases they defend the abuser instead of protecting the abused child, and often punish the person who informed about it. He explains that when mothers raise alarm about their partners ritually abusing the child in a satanic way, those mothers are accused of making it up, and in most cases the children are given to the abusive partner. This is exactly what happened to Elisa and Gabriel, for example, who revealed the most shocking statements about satanic ritual abuse by their father and a satanic cult.
As I said, we kill babies, we drink the blood, we eat them. Because our dad, he forces me and Gabriel to do it. Because we are not strong enough to cut a baby's head off. He has us to hold the knife and he puts his hand on the top of our hand and he helps us to cut the baby's head off. So he is teaching me and Gabriel.
These children were taken away from their mother, Ella Draper, because she allegedly used force to make her children say these things. Since then, Alyssa and Gabriel have been with their father, who was said to be the leader of the satanic group in Hampstead. Sabine McNeil, who has published several revealing videos of testimony by Alyssa and Gabriel, was strongly vilified, persecuted, and finally sentenced to 9 years in prison. Her main websites all had to be deleted from the internet. She says that prisons are often the final stop for mothers so that the state can, so to speak, legitimately get their children. She has uncovered child theft and helps those affected. Among other things, at the EU Parliament, she was the voice of 30 victims.
That's why we are here today. We are here crying for help. There are children screaming to be heard. If you don't hear at those children scream, who will?
In a 1989 television interview, foster mother Kathleen Sorensen recounted her experience with 30 foster children who had been ritually abused. Shortly thereafter, she died in a mysterious car accident when an oncoming vehicle changed lanes for no reason and crashed into her. Her testimony weighs heavily.
And these people believe that the more innocent the victim, the more horrible the death, the closer you are at the moment of death, the more magic is released and the more spiritual power they get.
The Ontario psychotherapist Sandra Fecht had several dozen victims of satanic ritual violence in therapy and spoke publicly about it. One of the victims was from an elite family, and Sandra Fecht was attacked by very expensive lawyers and lost her license as a psychotherapist, losing 80,000 Canadian dollars in legal fees. Larissa Budnario from Romania filed a complaint against her abuser with the police, but they helped the perpetrator. She reports of networks between these pedophile perpetrators and the courts, police, and high-level politicians. She has had experiences not only in Romania, but also in Germany and Italy. The abuse victim, Justine, also filed a complaint and says that the judge acquitted the child molester. And this despite the fact that a psychological report established that the story was true. Abuse victim Lena Jensen describes the same experiences with the courts, that the perpetrators were helped until the case was dropped, she says. Wikipedia founder Larry Sanger says that pedophiles rule the world and that the media and courts protect the abusers. Andrea from Germany experienced the same thing. She filed a criminal complaint against ritual abuse. I quote, "For crimes against humanity, specifically murder, incitement to murder, forcible defloration, deflowering, sexual and ritual abuse, pedophilia, child pornography, bodily injury, including their reanimation, torture by waterboarding. That means being plunged underwater until you're almost drowned. Electric shocks, bone fractures, cannibalism, including forced cannibalism, etc." The public prosecutor's office answered, after a long wait, that the matter was time-barred and that only homicides are not subject to a statute of limitations. But Andrea had filed charges of murder, so she replied again. But the prosecutor had only been ordered to investigate in the area of rape. So the whole long list of ritual crimes was simply ignored.
But then there is the problem that ritual violence is not condemned as such in the judicial system. This term ritual violence does not exist in the legal system so far.
Many other victims testify about the large elite perpetrator network connections. For example, the survivor Angela Power Disney from Ireland says that she has been ritually abused by high-ranking personalities. The perpetrators are highest members of the military. She's been publishing cases of satanic ritual abuse since then and was recently ordered by the English judiciary to stop with it. The latest intimidation is an email, allegedly from the Irish police, that she should stop her investigative education. This raises the question, which is worse, the crime itself or the concealment? Survivor Ali Carter from the USA named some prominent perpetrators of these horrific crimes by name: Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Joe Biden, singer Steven Tyler, Beyoncé, actor John Travolta, musician Akon, and rappers Too Short and Kid Cudi. She could list names all day long. To Joe Biden, she had been sold several times. She'd been raped, beaten, stalked, chased, and tortured. She also witnessed child sacrifices to Satan. According to her experiences, the U.S. Child Protective Services, CPC, conducted child trafficking. She said that the police are also part of Masonic lodges, and police officers are themselves involved and cover up the criminals. The so-called Child Abduction Emergency Alert, called Amber Alert, belongs to the Rothschilds and John Podesta, who was involved in the child molester scandal Pizzagate.
It is covered up by your local FBI. It is covered up by your local police department. There's many people who trade to eat, beat, and rape children under the ground. Yes, there are millions just like me. There are millions worse off than me.
She had been rushed to many celebrities and was dragged into the Hollywood party scene. She says that these people are satanic and worship the devil. She talks about how stars sell their souls to Satan, and many in Hollywood are Satanists. Many, like singer Sia or Katy Perry, also show this publicly with satanic symbols. Hollywood film producer John Paul Rice says that the most powerful 6 media corporations in the world are all involved in child trafficking. It is a system of child abuse that we have been living in for a very long time. I quote him, "The people on TV who smile at us and tell us stories and deliver news are the ones who are hiding all this from us." And this would be about a crisis in the management of our banking institutions, our media corporations, the entertainment industry, in Hollywood and the music industry. When you see young stars like Britney Spears or Amanda Bynes having nervous breakdowns, it's because they're being sexually abused and passed around like candy. The documentary film Enter the Pizzagate reveals that Walt Disney joined the Freemasons in 1920 and 11 years later received the honorary award of the 33rd degree of Freemasonry. At Disneyland, he established an exclusive club, only for Freemasons, the Club 33. Former Disney Vice President Michael Laney was convicted of child sexual abuse, as was music publishing executive John Healy. Former child stars Ricky Garcia, Jordan Pruitt, and Bella Thorne have all apparently raised sexual abuse charges against Disney. Hollywood stuntman Mike Smith said that he found God because he realized that the Luciferian and occult world is truly real. He talks about the huge influence of Disney and how this small group of people controls the content we see on all channels. The heads of the biggest movie studios are in direct communication with the government, he said. Action director and Hollywood stuntman Brad Martin confirms these connections, and he left the movie business due to dilemmas of conscience. The CIA whistleblower Kevin Shipp testified that the CIA was paying major media journalists for fake stories, and that the only way to succeed in Hollywood was to join the occult. And when he was a police officer, they had many cases of satanic abuse in high schools, colleges, government, and Hollywood. The CIA whistleblower tells that a high-ranking National Security Agency officer, Michael Aquino, was a practicing Satanist who ran a pedophile ring. He created the Satanic Temple of Set, an occult satanic U.S. association, which he still directs today. He also held a training position with the U.S. government. About 50 children testified that this high-ranking officer had abused them, and although there were several witnesses who said he had abused the children through satanic rituals, he successfully walked out of the trial free. U.S. basketball player Larry Johnson tweeted that top athletes flirt with mysterious Babylonian religions that involve heinous ritual sacrifices to Baal and Baphomet. But it's not just professional athletes, he said. Everyone in the entertainment industry participates and has no reservations about showing it. Former Boyzone pop star Shane Lynch calls the music industry satanic. He testifies that in rooms at the top of the top, satanic prayers were said over music albums in ceremonies before they went to the radio stations. He converted to Jesus and escaped all the occult horror this way, which he describes in his interviews. The rapper Smart says that the music business is run by the devil to get as many people away from God as possible. The artist, he says, is just the tool to push the devil's message. The artist is the mouthpiece between the devil and the fan. Therefore, the artist is powerful. And they all make these signs, he says. The survivor, Chantal Frey, met actors and many famous personalities during gruesome rituals and sacrifices to which she was taken around the world. She mentioned some of them here by name.
In the Château de S.R.A., a castle in Belgium, where I was educated as Mother of Darkness, I always again met Princess Stephanie Windisch-Graetz. This princess is the great-granddaughter of Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elizabeth, the so-called Sissy of Austria, so it is absolutely high nobility. And in this castle, I also met Tom Cruise. A gruesome ritual was his birthday present. In England, Queen Elizabeth II brought me to Westminster Abbey, where she watched as I was tortured on a stretching bank. At the age of 16, I was brought to Sagrada Familia, a great cathedral basilica in Barcelona. This was April 30th, the birthday of Satan. The celebration was led by the Austrian actor and singer Peter Alexander. At this celebration, I recognized some famous people among the many people present, like, for example, King Philippe of Spain, the French rugby player Serge Blanco, the actor Gérard Depardieu, and the three tenors Placido Domingo, Luciano Pavarotti, and José Carreras. The French actress Catherine Deneuve, the American actress Elizabeth Shue, the American author Meg Cabot, Anna Komorowska, the wife of the Polish president Bronisław Komorowski, and also Tony Blair is who I met there. At another occasion, I was led to then US President Jimmy Carter by Margaret Thatcher, and I was punished with a rope. I was strangled with it several times until I fell unconscious. At the age of 4 or 5, I met Bill Clinton at a party. Participants named their sexual preferences to me, and I had to satisfy them then.
Pulitzer Prize-nominated U.S. journalist Paul Rodriguez revealed extravagant parties among Washington, D.C.'s elite with underage callboys, quite a few of whom were also satanically ritually abused, tortured, and some even gruesomely murdered. The investigation named several White House insiders, members of the military, government officials, locally based U.S. military officers, businessmen, lawyers, bankers, congressional staff, and members of major media outlets as clients. Paul Rodriguez's investigation came to a stillstand after all evidence was either classified by the Secret Service as confidential or stuck in bureaucracy. Troy Boner and Alicia Owens testified to hundreds of parties where they and other victims were abused by local politician Larry King and other prominent men. The main actors, they said, were Police Chief Robert Waterman and newspaper editor Harold Anderson. Using various intimidation tactics, the FBI threatened Troy Boner to keep quiet about his story. Shortly after these threats, Troy Boner was found dead in a hospital room, anesthetized and beaten. Troy's brother Sean was also found dead with a gunshot wound. This occurred during George W. Bush's re-election campaign. According to several victims, Bush also had attended these abuse parties. David tells of adrenochrome parties with celebrities in which they brutally tortured babies and very, very young children in order to drink or inject the adrenaline-enriched blood as a drug.
These parties would often happen in big houses. There was a lot of prominent people. I mean, I've seen royalty, politicians, famous people, all sorts of people.
A street social worker with a team crashed a party like this on his own. They gained access, and he said in the interview, I quote, "We saw the devil, simply the devil pure in his truest manifestation." He saw torture rooms with operating tables, handcuffs, chains, dead children everywhere. The whole thing was set up like an amusement park, he said. But because there was an escape plan, not everyone was there anymore. This eyewitness was forcibly silenced. He was hung up by the hands by the police, whipped, and treated as a criminal. As a result, he became very sick. Holly Gregg is a survivor of ritual violence from Scotland. Because of Down syndrome, she has an extremely good memory and names the perpetrators by name, including a judge, police officers, lawyers, and a school principal. Medical and other evidence supported Holly's account, but Grampian police did nothing about the perpetrators. Her mother, Anne Gregg, persistently tried to bring the perpetrators to justice, but authorities forcibly delivered her to a mental hospital. Holly Gregg's uncle was murdered because he wanted to protect her. Renowned physicist Dr. Catherine Horton calls the police a shield for organized crime. She testifies that she was sold in a brutal human trafficking ring as a torture and mutilation slave to European countries and the United States. And now she exposes these crimes and the criminal structures. For example, she says the investigations by Detective Inspector John Wedger against pedocriminality and child trafficking were blocked by Bernhard Hogan Howe at the highest level of the whole police. After the Jimmy Savile scandal, Howe was chief of police in many places and at the highest positions. During his tenure, quite a few arrested celebrities were released on bail without charges. According to Wikipedia, Bernhard Hogan Howe advocated that complainants should not simply be believed. For example, Carl Beach testified that several high-profile men had abused him and that he had witnessed the murder of 3 boys. Hogan Howe dropped the investigation, and Beach was sentenced to 18 years in prison for lying in July 2019. That's the wording on Wikipedia. Hogan Ho, instead, was knighted. In addition to this, Dr. Catherine Horton exposes the crimes in psychiatry.
Once you know and are aware of the fact that all of these psychiatric wards have from the very first day been intended as detention camps, that most of the people on the direction level who built them were chosen by the cartel as pedophiles and psychopaths and serial killers, then the whole thing is not so surprising anymore. No success stories are known to me in psychiatry. None. Absolutely none.
It is also common knowledge that uncomfortable witnesses are often labeled crazy and disappear into psychiatric hospitals. This is also confirmed by Dr. Rainer Kurz, who has been educating within the British Psychological Society about satanic ritual abuse for years. Natalie Augustina was a Dutch supermodel in the 1980s. She was committed to a psychiatric hospital for exposing the depravity of the Illuminati. Natalie speaks of hundreds of thousands of girls and boys who were systematically raped by royal, political, and military governments. They were taken to parties of the rich, where they were raped on a stage. Natalie tells how some children were raped to death and tortured by the elite, and how everything is filmed. Natalie says that she was taken to places where everything royal, noble, elite, the top political and military was. Mexican top model Gabriela Rico Jimenez was also transferred to a psychiatric center after she was invited to an Illuminati party and fled a hotel screaming hysterically in shock. She screamed loudly.
The Queen of Scotland and the Queen of England, they killed a lot of people. Death to that class of humans. Get out of here. They ate humans. Those disgusting. They ate humans. I didn't know of anything. I mean, of the assassinations, yes. But they ate humans. Humans. Humans smell like meat. You are not taking me anywhere until we clear all this up. You're not taking me. You people had me there so you could take a photo of me. No, let go of me.
Then she was led away, and no one ever heard of her again. She also accused Carlos Slim Elu of knowing he is one of the richest men in the world. Leonie was also in the psychiatric ward. The private clinic recorded that her parents belonged to a satanic sect. She had been conceived for the sect. Sodomistic rituals and many other cruelties were recorded. It was noted that she had to hurt children and kill infants in order to incur guilt. After the psychiatric stay, she suddenly denied everything and said that the trauma therapist, out of a strong conspiracy delusion, had talked her into all of this. None of it was true. Swiss television, S.R.A. devoted an entire documentary to Leonie. The other victims who testified about the same cruel things were not even visited, but only ridiculed in the documentary film Satanic Panic 1. After a storm of indignation and a huge amount of viewer criticism had flared up against S.R.A. and the journalist Robin Raymond because none of the victims had had their say, another report came out in which only so-called anonymous victims were filmed and were dubbed by an S.R.A. spokeswoman. They said, for example, that the therapist had talked them into it, and that's how they became victims, or that it didn't happen at all, etc. So you don't see a face, and you don't even hear a real voice, so you can't verify any of this. None of the notable victims of satanic ritual abuse got a voice on S.R.A. And now, dear viewers, we want to have a survivor speak who reveals explosive information about S.R.A. Petra. Petra barely survived ritual abuse and extreme torture by an Illuminati lodge. Occult rituals were held. They tortured babies, children, and animals, raped or sacrificed them to cultivate connections to the demon world and deities. Even before Petra was able to walk, she was abused by her father, who was part of the lodge. She also was placed in a torture program and, for example, was hung for hours in an underground vault by the back of her head or her feet and left alone. During the rituals, members of the cult were wrapped in dark capes with hoods. She recognized lawyers, policemen of various levels, post office managers, doctors, psychiatrists, house painters, pharmacists, judges, industrialists, politicians, school principals, civil servants, morticians, a philosopher, and building contractors. Petra calls a high-ranking perpetrator from the cult by name, Fritz Schneider. The Solothurn Government Council member and Director of Education, who subsequently became president at S.R.F. According to Petra, the S.R.F. was a mouthpiece for these circles to directly influence the people. She also names the then cult leader of the lodge as well as pedocriminal, Willy Richard. He was a federal parliament member and then even rose to become federal president. Let's take a look now at the current president of the Swiss Confederation, Alain Berset. Here he is at the inauguration of the Gotthard Tunnel. A satanic spectacle from A to Z. But what does that have to do with an opening ceremony for a tunnel? Or what does that have to do with Swiss values? Alain Berset likes to post gloomy pictures of himself. Or is this someone else pretending to be him, Alain Berset, on Instagram? Let's take a look at this picture. Disgustingly cruel, isn't it? But apparently Alain Berset likes it. Someone filmed this from Instagram and put it up on the web. No, that really isn't a photo composite. And shortly afterwards, the traces were erased. I wonder why. Can someone please investigate this? This channel on Instagram called Alain.Berset has loads of likes for cruel pictures. This is a completely deviant picture gallery with extreme cruelty, mutilation, and blood, which I can't show here. Because upright, normal people can't bear that at all. Such deviant pictures seem to please Alain Berset. Here, our federal president makes the old familiar satanic sign of the two devils' horns. Yes, according to the media, it is suddenly just supposedly representing a harmless French fries fork. In the context of these aberrations, however, it really rather reminds of devil's horns and not of French fry forks. While our federal president, according to citizen statements, is visiting an extremely sadistic exhibition, keyword Gallery C, and the Instagram channel named after him posts likes for these depravities. At the same time, he strives together with the Federal Council to anchor nonviolent education in the Civil Code. This fits together just about as well as the devil's birthday being celebrated at the same day as the Day of Nonviolent Education, namely on April 30th. Are these all just coincidences? So the media are now rushing after every little remnant of Christians who raise their children, as they did for centuries, millennia before, with the help of a cute little bamboo rod. This is used explicitly only, as the Bible says, when the child opens itself to devilish powers. If, for example, a little boy scratches his little sister's face out of malice, then there are one or two strokes on the bottom, and the little one feels, here is fire, this is hot, I won't play with it, I'll not become a devil. But probably our government wants little devils, for those are easier to corrupt, as Dr. Catherine Horton describes impressively. In this system, those who have no scruples and conscience rise really high. Sincere people and people of integrity are usually stuck at the lower ranks. So, for example, the media, and especially S.R.A, portray my father, Ivo Sazic, as an evil beating guru. And now they're also agitating against the Lederach chocolate factory with its Christian school. But how did the media report on this man here, for example? In 2011, Yves Rausch shot his ex-girlfriend in the chest with his crossbow from close proximity and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He was also previously convicted of theft and incitement of the people. And then in 2020, when he threatened 4 policemen with a gun in the Black Forest and disarmed them, the media celebrated him across the country as the Black Forest Rambo, as the new Robin Hood, as the Ranger of Oppenau. And when he was arrested, he injured a policeman with an axe bow. How is it that the media praise such a person? The then 8-year-old Natalie, who was a victim of cruel satanic ritual abuse and torture by her own father and a large network around him, recognized this Yves Rausch as a perpetrator and her father's friend. She described exactly how this Yves Rausch lived in a cabin in the woods before this became public in the media. Besides Yves Rausch, Natalie also recognized other people who were involved in the cruel satanic rituals and killings. The Natalie case has been known since the fall of 2019 through press reports in Switzerland. According to Natalie, there are countless tunnel systems under the ground which only insiders know about. In these tunnels, people are tortured, killed, and eaten. Medical experiments are carried out, hybrids are bred, organ trafficking takes place, adrenochrome is taken, Satan is worshipped there. Natalie recognized many perpetrators. Among them are prosecutors, judges, lawyers, policemen, a former city mayor, county council members, federal parliament members, heads of child and youth psychiatry, and employees of the KESB, the Swiss Child and Adult Protection Agency. All these entanglements and crimes that have been uncovered by Natalie and all the other victims must be investigated and punished by independent organizations. Speaking of the KESB, since September 14, 2023, people have been demonstrating day and night in front of the KESB building in Sissach. That's for over a month now, with candles at night and with banners and slips of paper. I'll read some of them. Child traffickers, rape. Children become toys for the authorities. Bravo to these people who day and night in cold and soon frost set a sign for the world. They have shown civil courage, just like the around 20,000 people in Bucharest who demonstrated on October 7, 2023, against child prostitution, child theft, and satanic propaganda, and for a return to God. And it is exactly this civil courage that is needed from all of us to save these children. I have not yet even told you about the 27 severely traumatized victims of ritual violence who have been given a public voice by Ruth Mautz, the founder of CARA, in her books Way to Freedom and Breaking the Silence. Cheyenne, Elisa, Sybil, Leona, Jacob, Sarah, Deborah, Yamina, Liv, Sabina, Astrid, Karen, Anna, Ernst, Denise, Rachel, Juliana, Susanna, Gerlinda, Josephine, Lara, Cavalita, Tamar, Linda, Johanna, Lynn, and Joy. Jamal also talked about a Pascal, a Natalie, a Thomas, a Sarah, a Hichel. Jamal tells that these atrocities were so inhumane that as a boy he again and again looked to the door and wished that somebody would kick this door open and would get him out of there. But this never happened. Jamal makes us aware of the suffering of these children who right now, at this very moment, are still being tortured sold, humiliated, destroyed. But how can we help? How?
Everyone needs to start talking out about us, because that's the only way we're going to beat them. It still goes on now, and goodness only knows how many children are involved with it. So, we need to start talking out to protect the children.
So let's start talking in order to protect them. Courageous people move out and lend their ears to the victims. Their voices, they give them a voice. For example, the political scientist Samuel Kuhlmann, or the social worker Lisa Bruhlmann, also Gabi Breitenbach, or the author and theologian Paul Verhaguth, and many, many more. The lawyer Martina Amato has written an open letter to those affected.
That I apologize. I didn't see you all these years. That I didn't hear your cries for help. But now where I know it, I bear a responsibility, because truth needs a courageous person who speaks out. We need an army of courageous people who speak out for the truth now. I raise my voice in love for you and for all the children who are still exposed to this abuse today.
Let us do the same, dear viewers.
I wish that we take much more serious what affected ones say, and believe them. Because the worst things happen very real, and they happen to the weakest, to the children, and they have no one to advocate for them.
Each of the survivors I have met who testified about these atrocities are driven with a desire to save those children who still have to experience this exactly now. As you and I watch this video, here are two little children being rescued from a truck in London. I cried when I saw this video. Yes, it takes you and me to save more children every day, by coincidence, by divine providence, and by more and more people getting to know about it. Because many of those affected reported that in the midst of these hellish tortures, they felt held and protected by something higher. Some spoke of Jesus, and this higher is with and in us and will save these children. I close with an appeal from Joy, herself a victim of ritual violence. She calls on all of us. Cry out if you can. Cry out for the victims to be heard by the deaf. Cry out if you can. Cry out.
Bevor du dich versteckst, vor Schrecken schnell wegrennst, bitte ich dich um ein Ohr und um ein Milligramm Herz unter diesem Erdenhimmel, wo auch du dein Leben baust. Gibt es täglich Mord an Kindern, rituellen Missbrauch zuhauf. Versetz dich mal in diese Rolle. Keiner da, der dich befreit. Was würdest du am meisten wollen, dass jemand für dich schreit? Schrei für all die Betroffenen. Lass die Kinder frei, die auf Rettung ihr seid nie mehr allein. Eure Verzweiflung kommt auf den der Schänderei treibt. Unser Wort ist für sie Feuer, deshalb schreien wir's hinaus. Ihr seid schlimme Ungeheuer, euer krankes Spiel ist aus. Schrei für all die Lass die Menschen frei, verschließ die Augen nicht, denn es ist unser Job. Nur durch uns wird's hier Licht, auch wenn du's nicht hören willst. Verschließ die Ohren nicht, denn es ist unser Job. Nur durch uns wird's hier